Hey, what's going on YouTube? I see we already have people in the chat. I will get to your questions shortly right after this intro. I just wanted to run through a few things on the agenda today. Interesting stuff happening as usual in the world of tech. Right now, we will be seeing in the near future thousands of websites go on red alert ahead of a vote to reinstate net neutrality. Not going to hold my breath on that one, but hey, we should definitely be aware of what's going on. Sprint stock plunges to a new low, well, a recent low, on concern that the T-Mobile deal will be blocked. Probably not a huge surprise. We've seen them try to make this happen in the past before, but maybe something will be different this time. iPhone 10 could be a problem for Apple. It's certainly not going to put them out of business, but it may have them rethinking what they do in the future in order to generate revenue. Ming-Chi Kuo, if you haven't heard of him, the guy who predicts all of the new features that are coming out from Apple devices and does so with a high degree of accuracy, is leaving his current position and will be focusing less on Apple in the future, so we probably won't be hearing the leaks from him directly. The second biggest Android vendor preparing to ditch Android altogether just in case, because as we saw recently, ZTE has lost their licensing for Android operating system, and they could not, be the only ones who fall victim to this problem or get themselves in trouble with Google in some way and lose that licensing. And apparently Amazon, allegedly, still selling counterfeit goods despite an effort to clean it up. Well, there's only so much you can do, right? We'll talk about all that and your questions right after this. Hey, we have Nate, we got Dave, Harvey, what's going on, guys? Alex Zoman, I hope I am saying your name correctly. Let's get this sucker centered here. Am I off to the side? Okay, so let me start at the top here real quick. We had a few questions in the chat. I want to try to get those as caught up as best as I can before we get started here. Alex said, can we change the iPhone 7 and 8 screens and update, or will it crash? My understanding is that Apple has patched whatever was causing this problem, but I'm not 100% certain that there won't be some vendors out there who still have problems with the current iOS. So there were two different things going on with the screens, and one of them was a problem within Apple's operating system. That was their problem that was affecting even OEM screens, and to my knowledge, that problem has been fixed. Now, there was another issue where there were some vendors who were kind of leaving some of the parts out of the LCD flex cable that were supposed to be there, or at least one part that's supposed to be in there. And if you're still dealing with those, you're going to have to most likely return them to your vendor to have them replaced, which would be a good idea in the first place. A lot of times what happens is we are asked to replace parts based on, being the lowest price in town. Someone will walk in and say, hey, there's another guy doing this repair really cheap. Can you do the same thing? And we often say, we could, but we really don't like to, because you're getting really inexpensive, not well-built parts in your phone, and you have this $7, $8, $9, $1,000 phone, or $800, $900,000 phone, but you want to try to save $20 on a screen when it gets broken. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but we do hear about this a lot, and as a result, some manufacturers have found a way to cut costs, and that's where this part of this problem came from. So to the best of my knowledge, Alex, you should, if you've got reliable vendors and good screens that were working previously, they should work after the update. But if you've got those really low-end ones that experience a problem, if you do the update, if the screen doesn't work, you should be able to switch it back over to the original screen and operate it until you can get a legitimate replacement that's going to work properly. So that's as far as I know. If anyone else has information on that, feel free to chime in. Nate said, will you put a link to your store? I want to browse. Absolutely, Nate. Let me pull that up real quick, and I will put that in the chat. So I have, I'm just going to give you the main website, and let's do this. We'll go to tools and supplies, because that's where I keep most of the supplies that you'll be looking at, and they're all categorized. Now, if you go to Go Cell Phone Repair, you can find all my tutorials and everything else, but this goes specifically to the section where all the tools and supplies are. So if you buy anything from there, you will be helping to support my channel, which is why, as of yet, I haven't come on here and asked for donations or created a Patreon account. I'm not ruling that out, but I really don't like to do that. I'd rather give you something, in addition to the stream, for your money. So if you buy something there, whether it's from me or from another vendor, I am an eBay affiliate, so I will generally get a percentage. It won't be a lot, but it all adds up over time. So Take a look around in there and check it out. If you see anything that goes directly to a PayPal link, you'll be buying it from me. If you see something that has an eBay listing there, then obviously that goes through the affiliate program. But I do my best to vet these vendors and make sure that we're not promoting anyone who sells garbage. And the great thing about eBay is if you're not happy, just like Amazon, you always get your money back. The customer's always right. So there's no risk really involved there. Dave, what's going on? Harvey, Greg M is with us. Ars Technica has a story about Comcast. Won't give you free speed upgrades from 50 to 160 unless you have TV service from them as well. Why does that not surprise me? And here's a funny thing. I've been talking about net neutrality for the longest time, and as Harvey can attest to, every time I mention something about Ajit Pai or any of the big ISPs or the FCC or something, I have internet problems, and this weekend was no exception. For up until 9 p.m. last night, for about 24 hours, my internet was in and out, and mostly out. So every time we called in, they said there's an outage, it's going to be fixed in an hour, and then it was 2 hours, then it was 3 hours, and it was the next day. So we finally got internet, and I hope it holds up at least through this stream for the time being. And that doesn't surprise me, Greg. It's really funny, and I'm going to get into that story in just a second, so I'm going to save that one. Hey, what's going on, Tech for Your Needs? Good to see you here as well. I hope you all had an awesome weekend. I had a great time, got some rest and relaxation, and ready to jump back into this world of tech. Seen a demo RE proximity sensor still not working after the iOS update. Yeah, and that was one of the things that I've had also on my iPhone 8 with an OEM screen from Apple, original everything, and for some reason the ambient light sensor seems that it's out of calibration somehow, and I think you can go in there and fix that. I've just been manually adjusting the brightness, but certainly not a surprise. Anytime there's a new form factor from any company, there's bound to be some bugs in it. And I'm not just going to pick on Apple for this. We've seen a number of problems with the iPhone 8 Plus and with the iPhone 10, and some of them can be fixed with software, and some of them maybe not. So we always expect that, if there's an iPhone 7 launches, then the iPhone 7S will basically be an upgraded version of that with far fewer bugs in it. But they kind of did a 180 on us here and just went from iPhone 7, make an iPhone 8 and then make the iPhone 10. There's no iPhone 9, there's no iPhone 7S. So I don't know. The whole numbering system and Apple's choices in the future are still kind of, in the dark a little bit as far as we know, but there's a big question about whether or not the iPhone 10 will continue. So we'll talk about that in a minute. 1001 Noisy Cameras, how are you? He says, the only way to solve all these is for internet service to be treated like electricity and water. It is important to leave it at the whims. It is important to leave it to the whims of the quarterly earnings cycle. Yeah, too important to leave to the whims of the quarterly cycle, and I agree completely, and it's unfortunate. I am not pro-regulation when it comes to anything that we buy, but if you're in a situation where you don't have any competition, what's going to drive, especially now with the lack of net neutrality, what is going to drive big companies to deliver on anything that you're not paying for? If you're not paying extra for something, there's no real incentive for them to do a whole lot. Let's see, the little guy, aka customer, managed to sue Bell Canada for breach of contract in small claims court when Bell rep said one thing on the phone, but then emailed client and said it was subject to change. That was Greg M. Yeah, there's all kinds of goofy stuff. I'm going to get into that also. What's going on, Johnny Chang? The screen has an OEM serial number. Even if it's legit, the number is zeroed. It can't be helped. eBay may need to change his title. Okay, I'll check that one out in a minute, Nate. Who is the company who is going to merge Sprint with? Well, that would be T-Mobile, and we're going to get to that in just a second. Actually, I want to bring the chat in here, guys. I'm going to stick with this format for now because every time I edit these videos, it removes the live chat, and I want people to be able to see the chat. But look, there's my store. But for now, I'd like people to be able to see the stuff in context, so that's why I want to keep this on here. So we will be seeing Etsy, Tumblr, and thousands of other sites go on red alert. They're going to be putting this little sign on their website that says "Fight for Net Neutrality." I wish I was more enthused about this making a big difference, but what's going to happen is that there is going to be a proposal in Senate. There's a good possibility that this could pass the Senate and would basically bring back net neutrality. The only problem with that is after the Senate, of course, it has to be passed by the House, and the president always has the option of vetoing these motions or bills. So the thing about this is, that's different now is we've got an administration in place that has declared to be pro-business. they're for business, they're for economy, they're for economic growth. And, I would argue that maybe they're a little more for big business than anything else. And when it comes to generating funds, to influence the votes of your representatives, all these big companies are going to have way more money that they're willing to, to invest in their futures. And it's an odd thing when you hear the arguments about infrastructure and you do the research and you find out that despite all the claims made by ISPs about not being able to expand their networks, in fact, they have been able to do so. In fact, they have got funding that wasn't used for infrastructure. And in fact, when they say we need to repeal net neutrality, don't worry, we're not going to throttle you. We're not going to make you pay extra for your internet speeds. Although this bill means that we could if we wanted to, don't worry, we're not going to, but please let us pass this bill that would allow us to, even though we're not going to do it. If you really dig into this, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. So will they go ahead and take advantage of all this? Probably not in the short term. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. If you look at their Twitter page, they're saying, don't worry, we're not going to throttle anything. We're not going to slow it down. And it would be unwise for them to do so in a short-term environment. If they started changing things next month, people would flip. But if they do it gradually over a long period of time and it's hardly noticeable, I have a feeling that most people are going to say, okay, this sucks. I have to pay more. My internet's slower. They want me to pay for this premium. But if you do it in increments, most people will accept it. And this is the crazy thing about how a lot of this stuff works, is that any big change that's made, there will be an uproar, there will be protests, there will be petitions, there will be all sorts of stuff going on. But if you do it little by little, it usually gets past the public. And eventually people just say, yeah, well, this is the boat that we're in. And I remember when it wasn't like this before, but here we are. So we'll see how this turns out. Now, the wild card in this, and this is a funny thing, and I don't like to get heavily into anything that sounds politically biased, but I will say this, and I think we all know it. Although Donald Trump himself is kind of expected to veto anything like this that would happen. And we don't know for a fact that he would, but we know that there's a good possibility. However, at the same time, he does so many things that are unexpected and exactly the opposite of what his base and his constituents and, his party thinks is going to happen. Who knows? He could let this thing pass. And if so, maybe we'll get net neutrality back. Again, I'm not holding my breath. I expect that, over time, this is almost inevitable, because every time we've blocked it in the past, they've come out with some new way of packaging it and saying that, okay, now we're going to do it this way and everybody's going to love it. Oh, you don't love that? Okay, we won't do that. And then they come back a little later, and then you've got SOPA, and then eventually you've got net neutrality repeal. And, there's always going to be something coming down. And hopefully this will help. If I can get a hold of this banner and it works on a WordPress installation, I will absolutely be putting this onto my website. But don't be surprised when you see that. This will be happening in the near future, and who knows? So there's a T-Mobile merge with Sprint, and this is one that I wanted to talk about right now because someone had mentioned this here, Johnny Chang. So we've seen this happen, attempts at this for a long time. We've had big carriers come in. AT&T wanted to acquire T-Mobile back in 2011, I think it was. And that was blocked by the Justice Department. And there's a lot of speculation that might in fact happen now. So earlier last week, everyone got excited about Sprint stock because they saw that T-Mobile had made an offer and that Sprint had agreed to it and they wanted to merge. And of course, that's only the beginning. You've got a lot of legislative bodies that come into play and a lot of, things as far as monopolies, duopolies, antitrust, all sorts of factors that go in there. And the big one here is the Department of Justice has blocked these traditionally because, hopefully in the best interest of consumers, having a limited number of carriers to choose from is not always good for us. Now, on the surface, the first thing that happens when you have a merger like this, Sprint and T-Mobile, for example, if this was to go through, is that you're going to close down probably close to 50% of those existing stores, because if you have a T-Mobile and a Sprint next door to each other, you don't need those two stores anymore. And if they're in close proximity, the first thing that happens is we'll typically see a lot of people lose their jobs, a lot of stores closing their doors because everything is consolidated into one location, into one carrier. So that's kind of the downside of it. The other downside being that for consumers having less choice, we had a lot of people who didn't like the whole idea of Metro being acquired by T-Mobile. The benefit, of course, was that T-Mobile kind of got rid of that whole CDMA system that Metro was using, And there's a lot of speculation also that the same thing would happen in this scenario, that T-Mobile would pretty much phase out Sprint's CDMA network, and of course everything pushing towards 5G. This is the next big thing. And if you look at a carrier like AT&T or Verizon, who is already planning to launch 5G in 2019 and 2020 in limited markets, it's going to be difficult for a company like T-Mobile or Sprint on their own to compete with these bigger networks because they just don't have the build out yet. They don't necessarily have the cash flow, So in order for them to move towards 5G, this merger would make sense because, again, they could consolidate their funding, their customer base, their revenues, and start building out that infrastructure. But the thing is, I don't know that a lot of people really understand how the whole network functions. It's not like you just go in and you flip a switch and suddenly a Sprint CDMA tower is functioning as a T-Mobile GSM site. It doesn't really work that way. And in fact, a lot of the equipment would have to be changed out. There would be a lot of upfront costs. So a lot of things would have to happen to make that possible. We already know that T-Mobile does, they outshine pretty much every other company, allegedly. If you talk to the right people, a lot of people say that one of the big benefits of T-Mobile is their customer service. They do really well with taking care of their customers and, kind of go above and beyond when it comes to that. But if you're traveling nationwide, if you're going outside of metropolitan areas, one of the challenges that T-Mobile and Sprint both have, despite all of the commercials that you watch, is that there are some gaps in their coverage areas. So that's one of the things that, probably over time would be improved if they started to locate T-Mobile's network onto Sprint's towers. But again, this doesn't take place overnight. This takes time and energy and money to make it happen. So, the other concern being that as we start having fewer and fewer carriers, it's a lot easier for them to fix pricing and say, look, here's the price. If you don't like it, you go to this other carrier, and now you have one less to choose from. And if the competitor doesn't offer what you're looking for, you're pretty much stuck with what you have. So that's one of the concerns that people have about this whole merger happening. And in fact, there is, again, what comes into play is that under the current administration, things like this are probably more likely to happen than they were in the past. So if there was ever a chance for these companies to merge, now would probably be the time for it to happen. I don't know that it will, but the main thing is that in the short term, because we now have cast a shadow of doubt over this merger, is that Sprint stocks have fallen. In fact, last time I took a look at them, let's go ahead and check it out right now. If you go to, this is on Bloomberg, of course. If we go take a look at Sprint right now, we are at down 13.69%. Oh, thank you. I have an ad blocker. Sorry, Bloomberg. I do because I don't like being bombarded by ads. Actually, you know what? I can let them through. I don't mind unblocking Bloomberg. They don't take advantage like most people do. So let's go ahead and pause. Let's pause it on this site. There you go, Bloomberg. Now go ahead and run your ads and everyone's happy, right? So this is what we're looking at for Sprint. And I want to say that they were talking about an all-time low over like the last 9 months or so. So that will most likely, correct to a certain extent or come back to close to where it was. But we'll see. I have my doubts about this one, I got to say. T-Mobile is not so great as with customer service. Sprint, MVNO are the more competitive than T-Mobile ones. And that was another one that came up, Johnny, recently when I mentioned, how getting down to only 3 carriers. And this was on another live stream that I did, if you guys didn't see it. On Saturday, I was on Easy Computer Solutions stream where we were talking about this stuff and just having a good time. And by the way, I wanted to say, I forgot to mention this on last Thursday's stream. Congratulations to Real World Review for hitting 500 subscribers. I know that, getting to that first 1,000 is such a huge challenge for anyone who's new on YouTube. But if you put out good quality content, eventually you'll get there. So it's awesome. He's at the halfway point right now. So congratulations to him. One of the things about the MVNOs that's interesting, because a lot of people will say that, well, if you're not just going to have AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. You've got Cricket. You've got Simple Mobile. You've got all these other things. But all of those MVNOs still operate through the networks that exist on these big 3 carriers. So Cricket doesn't have their own network. They're riding on AT&T's network. And Simple Mobile does not own their own network. They're basically T-Mobile in a brown paper bag. So, anything that happens with these big carriers, you would assume is going to affect any of these MVNOs. I would especially think something like Ting, that runs on the Sprint network. That's probably going to make a big difference to how their product functions because it's riding on another network. We will see, of course, obviously. Can't read the future. What was this? It is listed as heat gun, but I realize now it's not yours. It's from eBay. Okay, I'll go and take a look at that, Nate. I certainly don't want anyone to have any doubt as to where it's coming from. So all the phones are going to be Motorola style, multi-band, and universal. This is the other question here because there are different spectrums for 5G. If this goes through and we eliminate the CDMA network on Sprint, Verizon will be the last and only CDMA network in the country. All of these 5G, proposed 5G networks work on different bands. If I remember correctly, I think that T-Mobile is going to be operating on a lower frequency. And I could go through and find the specifics here, but the thing is, if you've got 3 carriers, there's also a question, and they're all running 5G on different spectrums. You also have the question as to which manufacturers are going to offer phones that support all 3 of these different bands, right? So if we had AT&T, and let's say that AT&T and T-Mobile operated on the same spectrum and Verizon on another, and Sprint something completely different, then it would certainly be questionable as to how many manufacturers would think it would be worthwhile to make phones that are supported by Sprint's 5G network. So this is one of the benefits that Sprint would have in this deal, is getting onto T-Mobile's network. That way, all of their customers would have access, we would assume, to the 5G network. Whereas if Sprint is to stay on their own, they could be left behind by a lot of the major manufacturers because they don't have the numbers. This merger would bring the combined customer base of T-Mobile and Sprint together to be close to what AT&T or what Verizon has on their own. But as a standalone deal, Sprint being one of the, pretty much the smallest network as far as subscribers go, they could be left behind, when it comes to the 5G network. So obviously for them, this will be a huge benefit if it does go through. I'm going to kill this for just a second and get caught up here on the comments. I love to see the comments, and I love to talk to you guys while you're on here. So for anyone who's listening to the podcast, I will try to say the names or something on here so that you know that I'm actually responding to someone. So Greg said, here in Canada, we have 3 incumbents for cell service, almost no MVNOs. Reason is that the 3 incumbents own most of the cellular spectrum and will not sell it to companies like Ting, which is a Canadian company. I didn't know that, but only serve them in USA. Interesting, I didn't know that. 1001 Noisy Camera says T-Mobile was very competitive in the early days of Un-carrier, but once they picked up more customers, they started pricing their plans like AT&T and Verizon, which made adjustments to compete. And this is another thing, from my perspective behind this whole merger deal. And whether we're talking about phone carriers, ISPs, automobile manufacturers, you name it, when it comes down to it, the fewer people who are involved, the fewer people who are competing to get your business generally equates to the less choices that you have, the less flexibility, and the more you're going to spend. And this is, I talk about handsets, and we had this discussion recently. If it gets down to the point, which is another story we're going to get to in just a second, if it gets down to the point where all we have is Apple and Samsung really is all that represents Android. And what's important here is what we see inside of the carrier stores. If you go to Verizon and you say, I want an iPhone, you got an iPhone, right? So we can just cross that off the list. If you want Apple, you get Apple. That's an easy one. That's a given. We can safely assume that for the short term or maybe even the long term, Apple will be offering something for their customers. Now, if on the other hand, you don't like iOS and you want to buy a different phone, you have dozens of different phones, different designs, different sizes. You can choose from such a variety of handsets right now. But if we end up losing ZTE and losing Huawei, and if Motorola and LG don't make something start happening pretty soon, there's not going to be a lot to choose from when it comes to Android. And when carriers see this, they don't want to, they don't want to offer a phone that hardly anyone's buying. So if they eventually all convert all their Android sales over to Samsung, and the other option is Apple, then you're going to get what Samsung gives you, and you're going to like it because you won't have any choice in the matter. You won't have any competition driving Samsung to do something on Android that they aren't already doing. And this is why I think every consumer should be concerned about this. Again, whether it comes to handsets, carriers, ISPs, automakers, you name it, anything, clothing, shoes, all the way across the board, the fewer people that are in control, the less choice we have. And back in the 70s, they broke up the Bell Telecommunications Company for this very reason, because it was either regulate everything heavily or create competition. And in order to do that, they broke them up into what they call the baby bells. I know this is going way back. But I can see the whole cycle happening again. You know, what if we got down to one carrier? Whatever they want to sell you is what you get. Take it or leave it. I mean, that's how I deal with my ISP today. I have one place I can buy my broadband from, and that's it. And if I don't like it, I cannot have broadband. So what do you do exactly? Good point there. So also what happened with the cable operators on the East Coast is kind of funny. Cablevision is now Altice. Yeah, and a lot of times a bigger company will come in and kind of absorb the lower ones, the smaller ones. Whenever the issue in regards to broadband infrastructure is brought up by the ISP, it always makes me question their intelligence. You can get broadband anywhere. Sure, it'll cost thousands for the customer, but they will learn the hardware. That's a good point. I mean, how much do you want? How much should you have to spend, though? That's my question, Harvey. Hey, Caesar, how are you? Good to see you on here. We have Caesar Eusebio. What's up, Mike? Hope all is well. Like this type of videos keep coming. Awesome. Caesar went to my phone repair training, man, way back. What was it, about like 6 years ago? Caesar has his own business in Napa. Feel free to spam your website or your service on there if you like, Caesar. I always like to see people, my success stories, came in, started phone training, learned the basics, and went out and just ran with it and opened their own stores. So good to see you on here, Caesar. Johnny Chang says, I think there's more cell phone users riding on MVNOs than on the carrier companies. That's entirely possible. AT&T has different bands or channels on the same spectrum than T-Mobile. Piano with Sam, how are you? Evening to you. Okay, so I always say this is a 2 p.m. afternoon live stream, but it's all relevant, right? It all depends on where you're at. So evening in England. Is 5G technology speed going to beat optical fiber ones? My understanding is yes, Johnny. In fact, they are saying that 5G is going to be faster than any wired anything that you have in your home. So hopefully so. We would assume that because we're going to see a lot of streaming services and video and stuff like that going on. So I would expect that, yes, it would be very fast. I don't have the specs in front of me, though. So, in other news, the iPhone 10 could be a problem for Apple, do you think? Yeah, well, we already know that every indication points to the iPhone 10 not being the level of success that Apple thought that it would be. And I'm not saying that nobody likes it. I'm not saying it's a failure. I'm just saying that it didn't meet the company's expectation. There's a lot of questions as to whether they kind of, went a little too far with the pricing. And I would not criticize them for that because you have to find out where the ceiling is. So if Apple said, hey, we think we can sell a $1,000 phone and it worked and it was profitable for them, that would be a good business decision. Doesn't mean I'm going to buy one, but it would certainly make sense that if they have a $1,000 product and people want to buy that product, that they should make that product. If they have a $10,000 product, same rule should apply, right? Well, it looks like the iPhone 10 did not meet the expectations that Apple had for it, and we kind of knew this already from, the screen manufacturers and the chip makers saying that they were cutting back because they're not expecting Apple to order as much for this phone in the future. So we'll find out tomorrow, May 1st, Apple will have their quarterly Q2 2018 earnings report, so we'll find out exactly, probably not the details as far as the phone itself, but we'll know what's going on with the company, so I keep an eye on that one. And this article specifically references Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, which makes chips for iPhones, reporting lower than expected guidance for the next quarter. So again, kind of something that we already knew about. And there's actually some rumors floating around here about Apple going back to a phone. Instead of having an iPhone XS or the next generation of what the iPhone 10 is, going to something that brings the home button back, which is funny, irony to me, because really probably my favorite thing about the iPhone 10 is that it doesn't have a home button. I haven't had a home button on a lot of the phones that I use, and I like that. I didn't really feel the necessity. I guess I got used to it. I guess that's the bottom line, right? Well, apparently a lot of customers who have Apple devices got so used to the home button that they like to have it back. At least that's what indications would give us. And also, the fact that they've decided to pretty much ditch the 3D Touch, which I don't think anyone was particularly excited about. And there's some question as to how big of a deal the Face ID is. And, outside of making custom emojis, it seemed like a lot of people were saying that having to hold the phone up in front of your face in order to unlock it didn't make a lot of sense. So to see Apple go back to either a Touch ID in the home button or in the entire screen itself, which we've already got 2 other manufacturers who have done that successfully, that would not surprise me. I'm still voting for put the Touch ID on the power button, so when you click your lock button, it reads your fingerprint automatically. But obviously, Apple has not historically listened to many of my suggestions, so I'm not sure that's going to happen. But I would not be surprised if we see something kind of a toned down version of the iPhone X that does not have an OLED screen and is priced significantly lower than the iPhone X is. Now, I don't know what that means for the future of the iPhone 8 or the SE or anything else that they might be coming out with. But one thing's for sure, and that is that Apple has kind of seen that as they gain market share, it becomes important to offer customers more than one choice. And this is kind of a thing that the public is responding to positively, and at the same time, a lot of traditional iPhone users are saying, hey, the whole idea behind Apple is it's simple. You walk in, you buy it off the shelf, that's it. You don't have to make a lot of decisions. You give us the best thing you have, and we take it, and we're happy with that. And now Apple's kind of saying that, not everyone wants an iPhone X. Not everyone wants a standard size phone. Some people want a Plus. And in fact, the success of the SE, which kind of, surprised a lot of us, would give us every indication that there will be an SE2 launching, more than a year after the original SE came out, but certainly people who appreciate that form factor. So if you don't like a phone that's bigger than the SE and you walk into an Apple store, you don't want that customer walking away just based on something simple like, hey, this phone isn't the right size. So when your niche is so small that you have, just barely any market share and you have your product, people get excited about it. But when a lot more people are saying, well, I'd like to get into the iOS ecosystem, what do you have for me? You got to give them some variety. You can't give everyone the same thing. And it's, again, irony to me that a long time ago, Apple kind of marketed themselves as think different, do things different than everyone else. And for a time period, it seemed like every customer was being directed towards the same form factor when it came to phones. Here's the iPhone 4, here's the 4S, here's the 5, here's the 5S. And that's it, with, very little, really no variation to speak of other than the memory. And, of course, a couple of years ago, changing that ideology. And we may see more of that happening. It will be interesting either way. I think there's more, back up here a bit. Where are we? Had to miss the Strange Parts live stream, was so upset. Started at 3 a.m. Sorry about that, Piano Sam, but check it out. That was a fun one. Scotty Allen, if you haven't seen the Strange Parts live stream, he is like one of the coolest guys ever. We had a short discussion. We actually had like an hour-long discussion before that live stream, just geeking out, talking about stuff, because he's one of the few people that I've had on the live stream that really gets into the hardware, where he's tearing stuff apart and he's micro soldering and he's changing out the NAND and, customizing phones and putting a freaking headset jack back into the iPhone 7. Man, fun guy. I'd like to check in on him like in 6 months or a year from that stream and see how he's doing, see if we can get him to come back. That was a lot of fun for sure. And definitely you guys liked it because we had a lot of views on that video. Let's see. Johnny Chang, it's not going to be called the home button anymore, but the Siri button perhaps. Speaking of, have you heard this already? Now, I don't know if this is still happening. Let's see if I can get lucky and click on the right one here. Yeah, so apparently there's a weird glitch with Siri. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead here so we don't have to get back to this later on the stream. So if you ask Siri the definition of mother more than once, you might get a surprise response from her. And here's their hint. 4 syllables, rhymes with other shucker. Yeah, that's a little obvious. Okay, so if you ask Siri for the definition of mother, she will read from a dictionary definition. Where'd it go? I thought it was on the screen. I guess not. She will give you the dictionary definition of mother, 3 different versions, and then she will apparently, or would, I don't know if they fixed this glitch, but she would then ask you if you wanted a deeper definition of it, and then she would use the other term that is often associated with that or follows mother. So this wasn't something that was built into Siri. This is Siri using a dictionary and reading back what she has in that database. So obviously when something like this happens, it's not planned. Somebody finds out about it, and I'm sure that they will fix that if they haven't already. But for the time, yeah, if you wanted to hear that out loud from Siri, that's how you can make it happen. Don't know why. Let's see. iPhone X Lite, maybe. iPhone X SE or iPhone SE X. That would be funny, Johnny. I would like to see that happen. Harvey, man, Scotty is such a tease. Go to China to mod your phone, otherwise you're out of luck. Yeah, I know. That's the crazy thing, is that the market there in Shenzhen, where he can walk around and just buy a NAND or buy, this part or anything else like that. And I was desperately trying to find a cover plate for an iPad Pro LCD. The bracket that goes behind the connectors had been lost in someone else. It was a repair that I inherited. And that stupid little bracket, no one has. There were two different vendors in China that had it, and they were both out of stock. And I was going nuts, and I finally got lucky, and somehow eBay suggested it to me. You know how they do that? You go search for something on eBay, and then a day later it goes, oh, were you looking for this? And then it's there. Well, I found one, but man, that is a hard part to get a hold of. And I almost said, Scotty, why don't you go down, buy me one of these, and put it in the mail, and I'll pay you for your time and energy. And fortunately, I found. But yeah, that is a big tease. Is it just me, or is Siri the most pointless thing on a Mac? Wow, that's a good point, Piano. And in fact, I know that there are people that use Siri. I don't particularly, even on my phone, and maybe I'm the only one, but the things that I'll say to Siri, like, Siri, open my Gmail and read me the second to newest message that came from Piano with Sam. And she won't really do that. She'll say something like, oh, you have so many emails in your email box. So personally, I don't think Siri's quite at the level that we could define as a personal assistant. Now, she's certainly more sophisticated than she was when they first launched it in the 4S, which I think was a terrible idea because it was so far ahead of its time and, really premature if you ask me. But I agree. When it comes to a computer, probably if you're using a computer, whether it's Siri or Windows even has a voice assistant built in, I assume that is to assist people who have other sorts of problems, whether it's visual, typing, something along those lines. My assumption is that that's why they built them in, because if you're sitting there on a computer with a keyboard in front of you and you're able to operate that keyboard, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have Siri built in, but it is pretty pointless, I agree, for me. Siri has an infertility jealousy syndrome. She cannot procreate and bark back at the user. What? Good thing I use Google Assistant. Alex, good job. I hope that it works out for you, because a lot of these assistants do a lot of, and I will say that Google actually, functionality-wise, I do get better use out of it than Siri. That's just me. So Ming Chi Kuo, which I always have a hard time with this name. That's exactly how it's pronounced. Ming Chi Kuo. This is the guy, and there's actually a picture of him. This is the guy behind all of the predictions for iPhones and Apple products in general. So it's interesting. He is actually going to be leaving his position as what is his position exactly? He's with KGI Securities, and in any case, he apparently is going to be leaving, and this is the guy that we get so much information on when it comes to new Apple products. He's always saying, Apple's going to be doing away with the headset jack, and then, not too long later they do, and then he says something else, and in fact, his accuracy has been surprisingly high when it comes to figuring out what Apple's going to do. He apparently is not going to be focusing on that anymore. And there was something about Apple getting upset about their employees leaking information and threatening, people's jobs and so forth. And I'm highly skeptical about how many of these leaks are in fact what you would define as a leak. In other words, meaning that it's not intentional, because every time there's a leak for any company that has a product around the corner, obviously that creates some buzz. People start talking about it. It certainly can't hurt their sales unless it's a leak that says it's going to be a terrible product, and you never really hear that. So it's always, the next iPhone is going to have a jetpack built in, so when you drop it, it can propel itself from the floor and it won't actually have an impact and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But this person right here, Ming Chi Kuo, has been highly accurate when he predicts what Apple's going to do, and not going to do that anymore. So here are some of the things that he's forecasted accurately. The 10.5-inch iPad Pro, the Apple Watch Series 2 with GPS, iPhone SE, Apple Pencil, 12-inch MacBook Pro models with Touch Bar and ID, MacBook Pro with Retina ID. So, he's got a long list of success behind predicting what Apple's going to do. And if you go down here to the comments, they're entertaining as usual. There goes half the rumors for Mac rumors, because he's not going to be here anymore. And of course, with 7 billion people in the world, there's a good chance someone else will become the next go-to guy for what Apple's going to be doing. But apparently it won't be him. So we shall see. Do you have any ideas on the reason why an iPhone has to be plugged into Lightning cable to be able to use Hey Siri. Sam, I may be completely wrong, but I think that that's something that you can enable in the settings. Do you have to do that? You have to be plugged into a lightning cable? Let's see. Let's try it out. I'm going to check out Siri right now. Let me get my sound on here and see. Now, I think I have her set not to respond to Hey Siri because there's a lot of pranks you can play on people who have that turned on. So let me go to my Siri and make sure that she's turned on, and we will test. Okay, I got listen for Hey Siri. I turned on listen for Hey Siri, and let's see what she does. I'm going to go back to my, sorry about the glare. Finally got my lights hooked up, so I won't be getting killed by any rigging. All right, so we're back to the home screen. Hey Siri. What? Hey Siri. I didn't even know that was a thing. That doesn't make sense. You have to be connected to a light. Oh wait, I didn't hit continue. Okay, now let's try it. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Hey Siri, how's the weather today? Hey Siri, it's me. Apparently there's some setup involved with this. Okay, so Hey Siri is ready. I don't know if you can see that. Everything probably looks transparent here. I had to go through that to make it work. Now, according to this, I have listen for Siri turned on. I'm not plugged into a lightning cable. Let's see what happens. Hey Siri, is it cold outside?
First, you have to tell me where you are. Go to Location Services Settings.
So, Sam, I'm pretty sure that if you go into your settings under Siri and turn on the Hey Siri thing, go in there and program it, at least on this phone. Oh, now she's responding every time I say her name. You should be able to turn that on in the settings. And I didn't think that the lightning cable would be a thing because that wouldn't make a lot of sense. Let's see, Johnny Chang. That is why companies make more than one prototype on a future product just to confuse leakers and possible industrial spies. Probably. That would make sense. Piano said, pardon me, I think I'm wrong somewhere on my old regular 6. I'm sure you had to connect the lightning, just test it on 6S Plus, and you don't. Yeah, I don't know. At one point, I know that you could not use FaceTime unless you were on Wi-Fi, and it seems like that was very early in the FaceTime days. And then if your phone was jailbroken, you could get around that, but it eventually, obviously, everyone could. But I don't remember the same Hey Siri thing happening. Hey Siri, why is Cortana better? That's a good one. Another bug discovered. No, it was just, it's one of those things, and Piano with Sam, I don't doubt you at all. It probably was that way before, but at least as of now, it works. All right, so the second biggest Android vendor in the world is making preparations to ditch Android. You all have probably heard this already. ZTE got in trouble again and has lost their licensing for Android. So no more ZTE phones will be made. Apparently, no more updates will be released for Android on ZTE. And this is a big concern for people if you already have a ZTE phone or you're thinking about buying one, closeout or anything like that. Chances are there will be no more support for the Android operating system on ZTE, something to keep in mind. And, if you buy one, you should get a great deal on it. But obviously, something that Huawei has been working on since about 2012, if I remember correctly, and that is the possibility that they lose their they lose Android as well. And this is a crazy thing because right now, Siri is literally transcribing everything I say, and this is why I had it turned off, because she listens when I don't need her to and starts doing crazy stuff, so I turned her off. So if Huawei, and another factor that's interesting here is that Apple was at one time looking at China to be their next big market, because once you reach a point of saturation like they have in the US, what do? You have to sell things on the back end. You've got to get accessories and other services that people can use with their iPhones, because once everyone has an iPhone, there's no need to buy another one, at least until the next generation comes out. So Apple had planned on growing the market in China because obviously they've got huge population, huge potential to sell a lot more products out there, and in fact have been losing market share and are now ranked, to the best of my knowledge, allegedly, below number 3. So they're not even in the top 3 when it comes to phone sales in China, and it looks like they're losing even more in favor of other Chinese brands who are stepping in, and in fact, Huawei being one of the larger ones and saying that, we don't want to have to rely on Google because we never know what's going to happen, especially as iffy as the whole trade situation has become. So working on their own operating system to build into Huawei phones in the future in order to have something to fall back on in case, just in case the day comes where they can't get Android anymore. And I would question if this, whether this shouldn't be a concern for all Chinese manufacturers, as well as the potential to ever sell their products in the US long term, because we have all this weird stuff going on. And, the behind the scenes question is, why are we really seeing carriers be pushed towards American, Apple and Samsung, which is manufactured in South Korea? And, I suppose we can include LG. But as far as Chinese manufacturers go, we don't see the support, and we've had the government warn people about using their, using Huawei phones and using ZTE phones, because they could be, the Chinese government could be using that to spy on us. And then you sit back and you think, aren't all phones pretty much designed to spy on their users? Like, I don't think that is particularly unique to anything that comes from China or any other country. Every single phone, every single smartphone on the market tracks your location. It tracks your browsing habits. It tracks, what time you go to sleep, how much physical activity you have, who you're calling, who you're texting, your emails. I mean, it's all right there. This stuff is already being tracked, by every smartphone there is. But for some reason, Huawei and ZTE are of particular concern, and coincidentally are probably two of the brands that could really offer some competition to Samsung in the US. Now, I'm only speculating here. I don't know any of this for a fact, so again, take this for what it's worth, but I find it interesting that we're kind of funneling carriers down to choose from manufacturers that are, let's say, on good terms with the US in order to get that stuff into their stores. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. I'm just saying that I think it's interesting, and it's a factor here that we should all take into consideration and be aware of, when we look at why this is happening. Now, ZTE got in trouble because they sold equipment to Iran against an agreement that we had with them not to do so. So there's no excusing that. If you're told, hey, you can buy this product on the condition that you don't resell it to a certain other party, nation, government, whatever it is, and you agree to those terms, then by all means, if you violate the terms, that's it. All deals are off. I'm behind that 100%. Even if the terms are unreasonable. Even if you say, we don't even want you to sell this to your own population, and that company agrees to those terms, then hey, if you violate the terms, the deal's off. That makes sense. But the fact that someone as big as Huawei is now saying, hey, we need to start worrying, and we need to start building our own operating system and having something to fall back on, I see a separation between China in particular and the US and any other country that is affiliated with or buys or uses the same type of equipment that we do here. So this will be an interesting story to follow and see how this whole thing develops. How hard would it be to have a vanilla Linux mobile smartphone OS that no single company owns, controls? Probably not very difficult, and I would guess probably not very popular at the same time, because we know that the big thing about iOS and Android is the app market. So until we reach a point where you can get apps without relying on any particular operating system, this was the death of Windows Mobile. It was the lack of access to the variety and the number of apps that were available for iOS and Android. So really, Google, I think, good thinking and lucky to get in when they did, because if the App Store for Apple would have grown exponentially over time, and Google had come in much later, let's say a year or two later, they came in with Android and tried to start building an app store, that would have been an uphill battle. But, they saw what was happening, they adapted, and, unfortunately, BlackBerry, not so much. Windows, no. There's the Firefox phone thing out there that someone recently reminded me of, just didn't take off. So if you have the ability to deliver apps, then I think that you might have a fighting chance. But if you go with something open platform that doesn't have the number of developers contributing, when we go to an iPhone or an Android phone, you've got, I want to say it's in the millions now. All the developers out there know that if they want to sell their app, they've got to make it for those two platforms. If a third one comes along, that's a lot of time and energy to invest into something that's not proven yet. So I think this is going to be the real barrier from anyone else entering into the market, at least in the US when it comes to that is, you've got to be, your app game has to be up to par, because people aren't going to settle for not being able to get Netflix and not being able to get, whatever their choice of music player is. If YouTube isn't built in there, and Instagram, and I mean, you name it, and the list goes on. If you don't have that stuff and you deal with a customer who's used, who has access to it on their handset, that's going to be a tough sell, or a tough transition to say the least. So, I'd like to see it happen, but I would be concerned as to who their customer is going to be initially. ZTE is going to use the OnePlus OS Oxygen OS instead. Really interesting, Johnny. I did not know that. Thank you for bringing it up. If you have a link, feel free to post it. With phones getting faster and instant apps, the traditional apps will not be as important, at least for the power users. Yeah, and I think that Johnny or someone else had brought up an article that talked about apps not relying on the app stores, and this, I believe, would be, that would be the perfect timing if there was such a thing. If you want to enter into the phone, into the smartphone market, and we reach a point where apps are streamed, where you don't have to rely on software that's built into the phone, that's when you would want to jump in and say, okay, we have a phone, you don't have to get Apple, you don't have to get Android, you don't have to get Samsung, but you can still get access to all the applications you want. That might work, especially for people who are kind of fed up with both companies. And, there's going to be a share out there who just say, hey, I don't like, nobody's ever going to be satisfied. There's going to be that customer, and they're going to say, I want to try something else. So the timing would be good for that one. If you use Twitter on the Android Chrome browser, you get an option to use the Twitter Lite Instant app. Hey, that's cool. That is a step in that direction. So hopefully that will happen. So what else do we have today? We got 10 minutes going. I am certainly not criticizing anyone who sells anything. Okay, people make their mistakes, and when you have an organization like this that sells everything, there's only so much they can do. But apparently, counterfeit goods are alive and well, and they kind of go into the details here. And obviously, no one wants to represent their brand with something that's not real, but there's so much product out there, and there's such a proliferation of not only counterfeits, but high quality counterfeits that are hard to tell from the original. In any case, there was this article here where they're talking about Kylie Jenner lip gloss, Supreme Louis Vuitton iPhone cases, and all sorts of other, even a knockoff pair of AirPods. Can't even say that. A knockoff pair of AirPods that were sold on Amazon through third-party sellers. So, obviously a concern. I would assume that you can take this stuff back. My question is always this, when you get to the point where your knockoffs look so much like the real thing that only a certain number of people are going to be able to tell the difference. What happens to the other customers? Let's say they sold 1,000 units of something that was fake. Someone figured out it was fake, comes back, asks for a refund, says, hey, you guys have counterfeit goods on your website. Do they then issue a recall to all their other customers that purchased that item? Do they credit them back? I wonder what happens exactly. In some cases, Amazon even helped ship counterfeit goods directly to consumers through the Fulfill by Amazon service. The fake AirPods, for example, were shipped to Amazon and sold with Amazon Prime delivery and drivers. The imitation goods were sold through Amazon's marketplace, which accounts for 20% of the company's total revenue in Q1, according to results released last week. Now, obviously, no one is immune for this. So again, that's why I wanted to say I'm not picking on Amazon. This could certainly happen to anyone. You could find it on, any online clearinghouse or whatever you want to call them. They're not a retailer, so it's not like you go onto a Best Buy website where all they sell is stuff that comes through their stores. You're dealing with someone who fulfills orders for a third party. So be it Amazon, eBay, or, anywhere else, this is bound to happen. But keep your eyes open and be aware. And, the funny thing is, when we started talking about it, it's like, well, what about phone parts? And that's always been a big question. And the short answer to that is that, if you want to buy phone parts, I suppose over a period of time, there are charts that you can look at online that'll say, hey, here's what a OEM part looks like, here's what an aftermarket looks like, here's what a low grade aftermarket looks like, and so forth. And eventually you just kind of develop an eye for this stuff. And certainly if you have a microscope and you can look at these things up close and personal, you can tell the difference. And Nate, I hope you're still with us. I wanted to mention something that we were talking about just recently, and that was when dealing with the Apple Store in particular. And, it always surprises me that outside of this group of people who kind of know the other end of the business. When we talk to the general public about phone repairs, you run into a lot of people who really just aren't informed about their options. So, I'm not saying right or wrong, and I'm certainly not criticizing anyone, but it's always interesting to me when I talk to someone and they say, I've got this problem. Oh, I guess I better go to the Apple store. I have this problem. I better call up Samsung. And, it blows my mind at how rarely you hear someone reference third-party repair, not because they don't like it, just because it doesn't come to mind or they're not aware of it. And one of the things that struck me about this is that, Nate, the way you have yours set up, if anyone hasn't seen it, you should check it out. He's in a mall location with a window right in front of where he's working on phones. So you can be walking down the hallway and you see a technician working on a phone, which I think is cool. And certainly when I've gone to a watch repair shop in the past, I still wear watches. But when you get a watch repaired, you sit there and you can see the guy working on your equipment. To me, that is about as transparent as it gets. I hand you my phone, I can watch you do the repair. Whereas when you go to a store, probably any other repair shop, definitely when you're dealing with an Apple store, you hand your device over and they disappear into a room behind a closed door with no video feed, nothing. You have no idea what's going on with your equipment. And it amazes me the confidence that people have, especially after talking to, what is this? I'm going to see what your message is here. What are we talking about? I guess it didn't put your message on there because maybe it came out wrong. So, the confidence that people have when they go to a company and say, here, fix it, take it, behind the scenes, do whatever you're going to do. You don't know who's working in the back. You don't know what kind of training they've had. And through conversations, I have an idea of what to expect and where I would never take my phone, my car, or other equipment to, because I've talked to people who work in the industry and who have been in the back room before and they know what it's like. Whereas, you come to my store or my channel or anywhere else or anyone else probably who's doing repair on here and they say, hey, I'd be happy. I may not be able to have you standing over my shoulder, but if you wanted to see a video, if you want to know what's going on with your equipment, I have no problem with that. Whereas a lot of times when you go to a bigger brand name company, you just assume that they know what they're doing. And I can tell you, knowing people in the phone repair business who have been in the back rooms before, and most definitely when you talk about car dealerships doing repairs, don't assume just because someone has a big sign with the brand name of your car on the front of the building that means that they're taking extra special care and that their certification program, whatever that is, means that the mechanic is going to do his best to make sure that your device, car, anything else doesn't come back with a problem in the future. Because once you pay for it, you're done. For the most part, they'll probably give you a limited 30-day, 60-day warranty, whatever. And as long as it holds up that long, when it fails again, eventually everything does, you get to come back and pay for it. Whereas when you deal with a small business or a third-party repair shop, they don't want to see you come back because something they did has a problem. I certainly don't want to do my job twice. That's costing me money. It's not gaining me any credibility. So, for the most part, everyone I know in this business does their best 100% to make sure that your device is fixed and it won't experience the same problem again. I can't say the same for, there are certainly other people in the world who do the same thing, although they're on someone else's time clock or, working in the back room for whatever else. But there are a lot of people who really don't care, and that's the sad thing. When you start to scale up and you have a large business, you have hundreds or thousands of employees, there's going to be a few in there that if you don't keep an eye on them, you may not get the same level of quality for every repair. So again, it just blows my mind. I think it's awesome, Nate, the way that you're set up. People can sit there and watch what you do. I love to make videos. I feel like that is almost the resume of the future for repair is, hey, watch my work. See me on camera doing a repair. This is what I do. What about all these other companies? I'd like to see their behind the scenes. I'd like to see their process for performing a repair and for them to be transparent about that and show the public, here's the quality of work that we do. Here's how we do it. Here's why you should be confident that it's a good idea to come back to us when you have a problem. I'd like to see that happen. I would challenge them to make that publicly available. Third-party repair just came to mind for those uninsured customers or those cases where warranty is void already. Yeah, that's true, Johnny. And this is what we see. It's so wild. I had a conversation with a guy recently who was pretty sold on the idea of just going to the Apple store for everything. And that's cool. There are people that works for. And certainly, if it's your best option, I'm going to send you there. If I think Apple can help you better than I can, I will recommend that you go to their store. But what we find a lot of times is that people are not able to, or they can't find the solution from the manufacturer that they want. That typically has to do with data recovery or data retention, I should say. So if you say, well, we can't fix your phone, but we'll replace it. Well, it's not the phone that's the big deal. It's the information that's stored on the phone. So there's not going to be an effort made to recover that data, unless it's a very simple one like plugging it in and hit synchronize. So that's where a lot of our business comes from. The proverbial rotten apples. Yeah, so friends, I finished a minute early today. Wow, I'm on it. I got this thing done. I want to say thanks again for everyone who joins. If I don't do that regularly, I certainly mean to. That's what makes it worth showing up every week for. I will be doing this stream every Monday at 2 p.m. Till something drastic changes. We also do this on Thursday night, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Sometimes we even have a guest. It's just hard to say who it's going to be. And, schedules are crazy. So getting things to happen usually means that I announce it a couple days in advance who the guest is going to be. So I'll get back to you, let you guys know. If you want a simple way to figure out what's going on, check out my Twitter. It's Twitter. It's at Fix My Cell Phone. It is not Go Cell Phone Repair because that doesn't fit on Twitter. If you just go to at Fix My Cell Phone, you'll get a message before these streams start. You'll get messages about the content of these streams so that we can discuss them when we get here. And I want to check something, everyone. Last week on Thursday, I set up a poll to ask you whether you thought that Apple should help Linus with his broken iMac Pro. And as of yesterday, I'm going to just double check here. As of yesterday, it was split 50-50, and it still is. So if you go to my live stream video from last Thursday where I had the hangout with Real World Repair and Easy Computer Solutions, if you'd like to vote, I'd be interested to hear your feedback. I'd love to have a tiebreaker because we're in a dead even tie. 50% said yes, Apple should help Linus, and 50% said no. And it actually started out heavily on the no side. And as a lot of you, I think, came on and started voting, it went more to yes. So we're 50-50. So if anyone wants to make a tiebreaker, be sure to vote on that. And then I'll let you know what the results are on Thursday. Johnny Chang, Greg, 1001, Noisy Cameras, Piano with Sam, Greg M, Dave, Harvey, Nate's Tech Services. Wow, there's so many people on here. I want to acknowledge all of you and say thanks again for coming on. Tech for your needs. If I didn't say your name, I'm sorry. I know those. Oh, Caesar. Hey, good to see you. Of course, Alex Zoman. I hope I said that right. I think I got everyone who was in the chat. And for everyone else who wasn't logged in and was just listening, thank you for joining. I hope Michael Taylor Jr., Sayazani. I hope I said that correctly. Thanks everyone for coming in, commenting, listening. And I will see you on Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If not, you can catch me next Monday at 2 p.m. Have a great week.